This is The Gay Life on KSAN. Hi, I'm Randy Alfred, and this morning we have a special panel on the history of gay and lesbian lifestyles, organizations, and political activism in San Francisco from 1950 to 1965. Our panel consists of Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin, founders of the Daughters of Bilitis, Dorwin Jones, past president of both New York's Madison Society and San Francisco's Society for Individual Rights, and Jose Sarria, the Dowager Empress of San Francisco and the first openly gay person to run for the city's Board of Supervisors. The Gay Life taped this panel at the March 25th meeting of the Harvey Milk Gay Democratic Club. The panel began with Jose Sarria.
My name is Jose Sarria. Most of everybody know me as Jose. I would say I have greeted everybody that is on this table to San Francisco because, number one, I come from a very understanding family. I was the aesthetic child. I was the child that was artistic, and it just was never mentioned. I had my mother's dresses to play with. This was normal growing up for a young man in the early 20s. Today, they give you guns and atom bombs to play with. But what I'm trying to say is the fact that I had a very open family relationship. And then came a time that I came to the Black Cat, which was a bohemian bar. Gay bars did not exist in San Francisco, if you can imagine that. There was no such thing as a gay bar. In other words, the word gay was never used to denote a fairy. You were a faggot, you were a queer, which two words make me vomit and at the same time. I dislike that. But you see, I went to this bohemian bar, which was a place where the people, bohemians, that were people that lived a little advanced for the social mores of the day. A woman dared to live with a man without being married, that type of thing. Dared to have a baby out of wedlock, things of this nature. And that's where I went. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me that the gentleman who was in the bank that wore the suit and the tie and was very correct was a cocker like I was. Only he didn't advertise it in the daytime. He was very prim and proper. And at night, you had to knock him down in the parks. I couldn't understand this. The people were living double lives. So back in the late 40s, I started to question, why were you living a double life like that? My job, my family doesn't know, they thought. There's none of you sitting in this room here that your families have not at one time or another suspected that you were gay or different than the rest of your brothers and sisters. The joke is on you thinking that you are fooling them. That was one of my prime things that I did at the Black Cat, was to show how these Nelly queens that worked in the financial district were fooling nobody but themselves. Have you ever seen the effeminate or the gay man get on the cable car to go down the financial district? They have the latest suit, down to the shorts, matching the stripe, matching the stockings, matching everything with their nice little briefcase. Have you ever noticed how a gay person runs to catch the cable car? How he reaches out to grab a hold of the post? How he stands there being very proud of the fact that he made it in one piece? How in a very, very butch voice he says, Battery Street. And then how he just floats off to run to the corner. And they think they are fooling people. I used to give a demonstration, which was very true. Of course, in those days, Brooks Brothers was the fashion. One suit, one tie, And every night you put it under the mattress so that it was pressed for the next day. Well, you see, I started to expound on this. I could not understand. And at that time, I started to say that gay was good. There was nothing to be ashamed of. I certainly have never been ashamed of what I've done. Ashamed that sometimes it wasn't a very good job, but not ashamed of being gay. I'm a very proud person. I come from a very proud family. And that's one way that you can get me, is to knock my pride. So consequently, I preached on this, and I got people to kind of agree with me. And one way that I would make them admit that they were gay was at the end of my shows. I would tell everybody that we would now stand and sing the national anthem. And we would hold hands, as some of you saw in the word is out. But you must remember that sitting right across the street while waiting trial were 200 to 300 of our dear beloved sisters that were not able to run fast enough to get out of the hands of the Black Mariah. Oh, that's old. I see that dates me. Black Mariah is what we call Tilly Law in those days. And they were up there because nobody could bail them out, or nobody knew that they were arrested. And so the sergeant at the time there, he's now retired, used to say, well, all right, you fellows, come on over here by the window so you can hear your fellow sisters sing to you. And we would all stand and we would all raise our voices and sing God Save the Nelly Queens. Was to give them moral support Monday morning that the world wouldn't come apart on them. But it would also make the people at the Black Cat, which numbered around 200 to 300 people on a Sunday afternoon, for one moment they admitted, and with pride, what they were. I've always said, it is no crime to be gay. The crime lies in getting caught. It's very true. Federal statute, there is no homosexual law in federal statute. That's all statewide. Did you know that at one time, Yosemite Park was fairy heaven, until it got so heavenly that even the angels couldn't get in. So then they had to have the federal officers arrest you, hold you. You were then tried in federal court. You ever go on a homosexual charge in the federal court, you end up not too bad, Or they will try you, which is not too good, according to the laws of that state, which in some states, you never want to go there. Another saying that I said, and something was mentioned earlier here, and that was the division in the San Jose people that are fighting the repeal of the law. United we stand, or divided they'll catch us one by one. Unity is the strongest thing. Division is the fastest way that they can wedge in, divide you, just throw you into a tizzy and win the battle. And that's what I've always said here. That is why one time we got a book of registry to register voters, which started many years ago, long before. I marvel at the fact that here people are running for this Democratic caucus. When I ran for public office, you had to be either Democrat or Republican. I am Democrat. My family's been Democrat since the revolution in Colombia. Well, that was the winning side. And so to be able to be listed as such, I had to go to the Democratic Party, and I said, I'm a Democrat and I'm running for public office. Well, they already knew where I was running from. And they very politely said, I'm very sorry, you cannot use the Democratic Party, because I was gay. So I said, well, screw you, and I went over to the Republicans. They didn't even let me knock on the door. So then I got indignant, and I had to have something, otherwise I could not run. I had to be one or the other party. So then I contacted the head man of the Democratic Party, and I said, you are infringing on my laws, and I shall sue you, because I cannot see where you can say I cannot use the Democratic Party, which I am a registered Democrat, and what I do in bed has nothing to do with it. I think you had better think over the situation. Well, in a very short time, I got a letter and I got a phone call, which stated that they could not deny me the right to list myself as a Democrat, but they could not endorse me, which I didn't particularly give a good goddamn anyway. But the fact is that I was able to do it. And yet today, here you are running openly. I think it's fantastic. You've gone a long way. Now, let's see. So somebody's at 10 minutes. I haven't talked about 8 minutes now. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Let me see. What else shall I mention? I saw the need for a lot of things in the city here. I am a native San Franciscan. I was born in what is now the very new edition of St. Francis Hospital. At that time, it was the very chic hospital for Nob Hill children to be born in. My mother was the governess to the chief of police, so that put us in a little better bracket, shall we say. She worked for that family for 18 years, so I was raised with City Hall. When I ran for office, there were a lot of people that knew me. The only people that had ulcers were that part of my family that reside in Spanish-speaking countries, because you see, the fact that I ran for office was put, shortly afterwards. I was the first gay person to be written up in a family magazine, which was Life magazine. And they just about died when they read the family name and they read one of their members being a out gay person. That really threw them in a tizzy. However, they could do nothing about it. They just shut their doors. What was I going to say? I saw the need for various things. I was very upset with Mattershine at one time. Mattershine was an organization that talked to doctors and lawyers, a very high bracket of intelligentsia, but they never did anything for the little fairy that was walking on the street getting arrested every month. Or they never did anything. So I decided that there was a need for an organization. And I organized the League for Civil Education. Some of you people do not know that it ever existed. The League for Civil Education is the forerunner of SIR. And at the time that I organized this, or had thought of it, I wrote letters to Chief of Police, to the Public Defender, to the Probation Department, to the Health Department, to all the people who had something to do with gay life, harassment. And I told them what I was going to do. And their statement was that I was crazy. They said, "You'll never organize the fairies." That was 15 years ago. Because Sir's, how old would Sir be now?
Sir's about
Longer
60,
ago than that.
64, okay. So it would be about 15, 16 years. And I told them at that time, watch me. I don't think we did too bad. It took a lot of coercion. It took people like Michelle to sit before 250 people and make her sign a book of registry to prove to the dizzy queens that when you registered to vote, you didn't have to say that you were gay or not. People were very, very self-conscious about putting their name on anything. When I organized the organization to get the 5 people necessary to sign the non-corporative papers, it really was difficult. That is the first non-corporate organization filed in the state of California. The League of Civil Education? Was there something else at that time?
Oh, yeah.
DOB? When was it? DOB.
Medicine, one incorporated.
Oh. They were incorporated? Okay, 50, let's see, 64. because the league was founded before in the 60s. It was founded. 64. No, the league was founded before then.
The SIR was founded in 64, and that was prior to 64.
Yeah, the league was founded before. But anyway, I don't know how I was very open when I did it. I don't know if number one was, or number two, or what. I know that number one was in Los Angeles, at that area. They did very much than just write a public, put out a public publication. But I was very open when I did things. And this really upset everybody. However, that was the only way to be. I feel that if you're up front and you are sincere with your feelings and what you have to say, that you will win in the long. So that's just about the extent of it. That shows you what I've done. Oh, the reason that I ran for public office, I didn't want to really upset the apple cart too much. I did upset Sacramento. After I ran and I lost, there was a delegation of senators and members from the House of Representatives. They came down to the Black Cat. At that time, the Burton brothers were just beginning in politics. And they came down and they said, you know, Jose, we would have openly backed you, but it would have cost us our political career. We did not know whether you were crazy, whether you were an entertainer that needed more publicity, or whether you really had a cause. But those people have remained my friends for all these years. I ran for one reason. I ran to prove to the then gay people that I had the right to run for public office, that I had the right that anybody else had to do anything within the law. The fact that I was gay did not restrict me. I was not a second-rate citizen. I never have been. My taxes are always first-rate.
This is The Gay Life on KSAN, and that was Jose Sarria, the first speaker in a March 25th panel on gay history. The next speaker at the panel was Phyllis Lyon, a human rights commissioner in San Francisco and one of the founders of the Daughters of Bilitis.
And I remember, as Del does, standing up at the Black Cat and singing, God Save Us, Nelly Queens, right? I think, Jose, that one of the reasons that nobody thought the fairies could do anything was because they hadn't discovered lesbians yet. I mean, that's right. Surprising to everybody, I'm sure, what has happened in the last 25 years, in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years. I was going to start out once upon a time. Once upon a time in 1955, before some of you were born and when a lot of you were still children, there were 8 women in San Francisco that gathered together to form an organization that was to become an international lesbian organization. Of the 8 women, there were then 4 couples, 4 femmes and 4 butches. Very politically correct. And out of those 8 women, 4 were working class, blue-collar workers, and 4 were white-collar workers, and 2 of the women were third world women. I don't know that we were aware of all that in 1955. We only knew that we came together as 8 women who were interested in, well, Del and I were interested in meeting more lesbians, right? And the other women were interested in other things. Partially in organizing some kind of a group where lesbians could come together to meet each other, to dance, to socialize, and later on to do other things that were not possible. Tut, tut, tut. It's not what I had in mind. But that too, okay. The history of DOB, the Daughters of Bilitis, spans 25 years. It's a little difficult to whip it into 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of skip over the top, and since Del is here, then she can catch all the things that I left out. It is true that the woman that conceived the idea of a lesbian group getting together, wanted a social club. She was a working class Filipino woman. She called us all together, and we met for 4 weeks steady, right, to decide what this group was going to do and how we would do it and how we could do it without anybody finding out we were doing it. Some of you may have a little difficulty understanding what it was like in 1955, but it was very strange. It was very different than it is now. And nobody wanted anybody to know what we were doing. So we met. We formed a constitution and bylaws, and we took a name. One of the women said, we've got to have a name, right? And we can't just keep meeting and not call ourselves anything. And she said, look, here's this book called The Songs of Bilitis. And Bilitis was a contemporary of Sappho, at least in this book. And nobody would ever know what it meant. And none of us knew what it meant, right? She was the only woman ever read the book. Dell and I went down to the public library downtown, right, to look and see Bilitis, lesbian, anything, nothing, right? Anyway, it's a narrative lesbian love poem written by a man, Pierre Louis, and that's where the Daughters of Bilitis came from. And had we known in 1955, we would have called it the Lesbian Activist Group or something like that, and never had to explain it once more. Okay. However, we thought it was really kind of neat because then we could just be a poetry club or the DAR or anything. If anybody ever heard the name, we could tell them it was something else. Okay. Although we gathered together originally with the concept of being a social club, because in 1955, there were not a lot of places for lesbians to go. The bars were pretty exploitive. You could become part of the floor show, right? There were a lot of tourists around. Or you could hope that the night that you went to the bar, the police didn't come and raid it. And so what we were looking for was a safe place. There was no dancing in the bars in those days. So we wanted a place to meet people and a place to dance, okay? We also decided as we met more often that there were other things that an organization of lesbians ought to be doing. And when DOB finally went public, which meant that we finally decided after a month to have our first open meeting where we hoped somebody else would come besides the 8 of us, we had a purpose, which was to educate the public about the truth about lesbians and gay men, an organization which we hoped would help the lesbian to understand herself and to believe in her own worth, to have a good self-image, and to never pay any attention to what was going on with what society was saying about us, and an organization dedicated to changing the laws that oppressed gay people, both women and men. It seems to me that 25 years later, we're all doing just about those same kinds of things, in spite of the progress that we've made. Okay. DOB struggled from the beginning for membership. Again, I would ask you to put yourself back 25 years ago to a time when lesbian and homosexual sex, none of those things were ever mentioned in the media, on the radio, anywhere. Everybody knew that queers were no good, but that was about it. The bars were being raided, and we were asking women to come and join and put their names on mailing lists, and a lot of them did. The greatest thing that happened for us, I think, was that about a year after we'd been in business for about a year, we decided that we weren't getting enough done, and we decided to put out a newsletter, and we decided to have what we euphemistically call public discussion meetings. The newsletter was The Ladder, a magazine that the Daughters of Bilitis published for 14 years, and the public discussion meetings were held downtown on O'Farrell Street, and were a way that lesbians and gay men could come into a meeting pretending they were the public and find out some very interesting information about their rights and about what was going on, and also figure out whether this was a safe enough group to get involved with. It was always a struggle for us, but the publishing of the latter. Now, I'd go back and say, Jose mentioned Mattachine and One. One started in Los Angeles in 1950 and is still going on. It's probably the oldest of all the gay organizations in the country. Mattachine started up here, started in Los Angeles, but then moved to San Francisco in 1953. When DOB got in, so close was the conspiracy of silence in the press and everywhere, that when DOB started in 1955, we had no idea either of these organizations existed. And it wasn't until after we had got our constitution and bylaws and everything and so on together and started operating that we eventually discovered these two essentially men's groups. We worked together relatively well for a number of years. Although I think that both Mattachine and One were always upset that we wouldn't let men join, because they said that, after all, they were coeducational, although they didn't have a whole lot of women involved. And once DOB got starting, a lot of them moved over to us. But I have to say that it was really a lot easier in those days, because there were only 3 organizations instead of, 1,000? It seems to me we have 1,000 in San Francisco trying to keep track of each other. It's probably difficult to understand how alienated everybody was then, because it was so scary to ever try to make contact. And for you gay men, it's probably even more difficult to understand how alienated gay women were from each other, because we work in very different ways and we don't have the same ability in a lot of ways to make contact, or we certainly didn't back in 1955. When Della and I first came to San Francisco in 1953, it took us 2 years to make contact with another lesbian. Not because we didn't see them, but it took us a while to get up nerve enough to say hello to them. As a result of the publication of the latter, DOB then began to expand. And in 1958, we saw the birth of chapters in Los Angeles and in New York and in Rhode Island, and later had chapters in Chicago, Boston, New Orleans, Reno, Portland, San Diego, Cleveland, Denver, Detroit, Philadelphia, Dallas, Fort Worth, Miami, and Lithia, Florida. That's one of the later ones. And I think that possibly at this point, the only going chapter of DOB left in the country is the one in Boston. San Francisco DOB, which was the beginning chapter, faded out in May of 1978. I think that one of the really important things that happened in terms of the gay movement was the first national lesbian convention that was ever held, which was held here in San Francisco in 1960, which was DOB's first national convention, held at the Whitcomb Hotel, which is now the San Franciscan, down on Market Street. And that was followed every other year by another national convention. In 1960, every lesbian that came to the DOB convention at the Whitcomb Hotel was dressed to the teeth in heels and stockings and skirts and earrings and the whole bit. And at the luncheon because we did very proper conventions in those days. We had speakers and luncheons and speakers and banquets. At the luncheon, a few men came in from the homosexual detail of the San Francisco Police Department. Almost as clever then as now. And they wanted to speak to somebody in power. And so Dell, who was the president, came over and said, what is it? And they said, does your organization advocate women dressing like men? And she said, well, look around. And they said, oh. And she gave them her name and phone number at work and at home and so on, and they went away and faded into the woodwork and never came back.
This is The Gay Life on KSAN, and that was San Francisco Human Rights Commissioner Phyllis Lyon. She was a speaker at a March 25th panel on gay history in San Francisco, and she was followed by her lover, Del Martin, who, together with her, was a co-founder of the Daughters of Bilitis back in the 50s.
I think I'd like to backtrack a bit to say that I think the origins of the gay movement started with the publication of the Kinsey books. In my day and age, nobody talked about sex, let alone homosexuality. And it was with the publication of the first Kinsey book in 1948 that began to see that, wow, there are more like us. And out of that, I think grew the Mattachine Foundation, which started in Los Angeles in 1950. And it was from and that was just a group of very small little cells that were meeting. They didn't even know each other in their different groups. It was very secret. That was in 1950. That was also the time when there were the purges that were going on in the State Department. There was a lot of flack going on throughout the country. Out of Mattachine Foundation came One Incorporated, as Phyllis said, and Mattachine Society. And DOB came along later, not even being aware, she said, of the other groups. A lot has been said about, what were you people doing back then? We never heard about you and so on. We were contending with what we call the conspiracy of silence. After we started having public meetings and so on, we couldn't get any publicity in the papers. We couldn't get anything. There was a series of articles that were done by the science editor of the San Francisco Examiner. But the publisher, Gould, said, no way could you print that in a family newspaper. Of course, they print all about rapes and murders and all that sort of thing, but you can't have anything about gays. It wasn't until the mid-'60s that the New York Times ever mentioned the word. They wouldn't even take an advertisement of a name of a book that had homosexual in the title. So this is what we were up against. The education that was going on in those years still needs to be done. We really got complacent in the 70s, thought we had it made, and now we know we haven't. And I think we need to get back to some of those educational ways. And really what it means is just relating to other people. Because we did find that in those polls that those who knew us, who had met us, were our supporters. And those who thought they had never met any of us were the ones that were really out to get us.
This is The Gay Life on KSAN, and that was Del Martin, one of the speakers in this morning's panel on gay history in San Francisco. The next speaker was Dorwin Jones, who in the past has been a president of both New York's Mattachine Society and San Francisco's Society for Individual Rights.
I think the whole business of education is crucial. We find ourselves talking to each other, but I think we really need to do more about talking to other people and speaking to groups and communicating because, it's true that prejudice is based on ignorance. And once people do know you and explode a lot of these stereotypes, all kinds of good things happen. I was sitting here thinking about how wonderful it is to be in a public meeting where women and men can sit here with arms around each other and remembering how we could hardly glance at each other in the 1950s. You certainly couldn't walk down the street holding hands or kissing each other on the cheek or arms about each other. This was something which was just very secretive. When people talk about this now to me and discuss gay history, I frequently make the comment, we weren't just in closets, we were under rocks. And it was a very, very difficult period. I've been involved with community organizations and services and programs and causes since 1950. So 1980 is the 30th anniversary year for me. And I can certainly see tremendous progress in 3 decades. But as I look at the 80s now and think about all the things we're facing, I realize there's still a very, very long way to go. In defense of the Mattachine Society, Jose, I must say, as a past president, that I have spent many nights in night court when I was dragged out of bed to go down and rescue people who were arrested in strange places, particularly the New York subway stations. So even though we were accused of being academic and a very middle class, very much the intelligentsia, there was a lot going on in terms of activism, too, in the 50s. And as Phyllis and Dale have said, there were 3 great organizations in that period, the Mattachine Society and DOB and One Incorporated. And certainly I would not have gotten into the movement if it had not been for the publications which were mentioned. I think we take so many things for granted when we're in an urban situation where there are support people around us and organizations we can attend. But if you were living out in the Midwest or in some place in the East in a small town, you were inclined to think you were the only person like that in this place. And to have something somehow be smuggled through called the Mattachine Review or One Magazine or The Ladder, you suddenly realize that somewhere, way off somewhere, there was someone like yourself, and you were going to struggle to make contact with those persons. And that's what happened to me. I came from a pioneer family in Michigan, a very sheltered life. And I remember when I first heard about other homosexuals and began to have some faith that perhaps I could one day really get involved with all this. So I did, and I became an early member of One Incorporated, and eventually became president of the Mattachine Society in New York, which at that time was the largest. It was the most powerful on the west or the East Coast. I think then in later years, when I became president of SUR, at that particular time in the 60s, it was probably the largest, most powerful on the West Coast. So I think I'm the only one in the history of the organization to have been president on both coasts. But in New York, this was a strange period. We had to sneak around meeting in Quaker meeting houses. The Quakers were the first ones to really defend us. They really came to our rescue continually, and we used to have early meetings of the Mattachine Society in the Quaker meeting houses. The Unitarians were also among our early friends, and it was a period of the McCarthy era. In fact, I recently had a friend do some research in Washington, and I understand there is a very heavy file on me, which someday I would like to see. I think I may send for it, because I'm sure many of us were blacklisted, and we weren't even aware of the fact that there was a great deal of information floating around on us, which has been kept through the years. We had pins even. I don't have mine tonight. I thought I might wear it, but I didn't dig it out to wear it tonight. But it is going to the Gay Archive Project, because along with all of my records and letters and minutes and so on, which are going to the library, I thought they should have this pin, which we used to wear to identify ourselves. It was a little enamel pin, something like the pink triangle of the 30s. And I don't think many of them still exist. I'm sure there were only, a few left from that period. There are names floating around such as Door Leg, and it's interesting that there would be 2 of us so involved in the movement with that same strange first name. But certainly Hal Call and Don Lucas and numerous people who've been involved in the past should be remembered. I think we even have somewhat of a George Washington in the person of Henry Hay, I suppose, who's considered our sort of George Washington of the gay movement in America when all of this was starting in the late 40s and 50s. But there were all kinds of organizations prior to 1950, dating back to turn of the century and the 20s and the 30s and 40s, which we certainly should give credit to. There was one called the Legion of the Damned, I know, in the 30s, and there was, of course, a great organization in Germany. It was quite a movement in Germany, and all of these things really led up to the 50s and the period then into the 60s with various organizations, which Phyllis and Dell have mentioned. So, with all credit and respect to the Stonewall riot and what has happened since 1970. I often think that many people do not realize the foundation, the background, which had to precede that. And we've really built on those years. One of the first challenges was a postal department ban, if you may remember, on one magazine, which was positively the most harmless magazine anyone could ever read. And yet they were not allowed to send it through the postal service, through the mail. And there was a great court case about that, and that was won, and it opened the door for educational magazines on this subject. But we were very careful in terms of how we referred to the homophile movement and the word homosexual. No one was using the term gay at that point. One of the proudest things in my life came when the Daughters of Bilitis named me an honorary SOB. So I became a son of Bilitis. And I believe there were only about 6 of us, maybe in the country. I'm not sure, Phyllis, how many, not more than half a dozen or so, I guess, of us.
There are a number, Dor.
Were there a number?
Including mayors and
all of that.
congressmen.
I didn't even know about that. Anyway, I have my little certificate, so that was great.
I don't know that all of them are proclaiming it loud.
I see. CRH, Dell has touched on, but I do think that the Council on Religion and the Homosexual is a very important part of the movement. And certainly the Great Raid of 1964, wasn't it? 65.
January 1.
January 1, 1965.
65 was one of the great landmark events in gay history. We also had the Citizens Alert System, which was not mentioned, and we were all directors of that at one time. I came across some little cards recently in my drawer with the phone number on. We used to carry these in our wallets, and it would give you instructions on what to do if you were arrested and a telephone number to call. And we had that telephone staffed around the clock with volunteers taking care of these cases as people would be harassed. And as Dell mentioned, this was very frequent. I mean, the police had a way of even parking their cars out in front of bars and sitting there and intimidating people from patronizing such places. I have, as you have, far too many notes to cover 30 years in a few minutes. But anyway, I can see in the 80s tremendous progress in women's rights. I think that has been really one of the great steps we've taken. Even getting women and men together in a way quite different than we used to. I think that's tremendous in addition to the public affection, which I mentioned earlier. Politically, economically, socially, we've come a long way. I am concerned about older gay people, and I think that's something the community needs to start dealing with. I gave a panel in a presentation in Tucson, Arizona in 1978 entitled "To Be Older and Gay." And this brought about the formation of a national organization for gay gerontologists, which has grown throughout 79 and 80 and has now become quite an organization, and we're doing great things. But I think something needs to be done about putting good intentions into services and programs, and I think that's our next great step for funding and staffing. we really have to do something about legal rights for couples in terms of taxation, in terms of distribution of property, all of the rights which couples should have. And the last thing I'd like to mention is this whole business of education. I think we really need to do much more about telling our story to other people and not just talking to each other. I think that, as Dell mentioned, those seminars with CRH and all of the educational materials which came out of the magazines and speaking engagements are really very important. And I think we should go full speed ahead with that in the 80s.
This is The Gay Life on KSAN, and that was Dorwin Jones, the final speaker in this morning's panel on gay history in San Francisco from 1950 to 1965. There are several questions asked, the first of which is, what was the Great Raid of 1965? Del Martin answered,
That was the infamous New Year's ball that we held in January 1, 1965. And that was when the Council on Religion and the Homosexual was just starting up. And about 5 or 6 gay organizations in San Francisco were going to put on this costume ball to raise funds. The ministers were trying to set up this with the police about having this ball at California Hall. And I think Cecil Williams and Ted McElvanna went down and talked to the cops about it, and were told in no uncertain times, they were really being questioned about their theology, and they were told, if you're not going to uphold God's law, we will. So then we got to debating about just stepping over this from the car into the building and the problems that there would be. Anyhow, when the ball took place, there were paddy wagons out front. There was light. The whole place was lit up. Photos were being taken of everybody going in and out of the building. And under those circumstances, which is like passing, a picket line of cops, 500 gay women and men in San Francisco crossed that picket line of cops. I mean, we had the ministers and their wives there to receive them as they came in. We had their support, and then we had to put up our end of it. There was we had attorneys at the door who were arrested for interfering with the officers in the line of their duty. Those 2 attorneys, were taken away. Then we went and called another one, and then there was another woman on the door. They were arrested and so on. And the ACLU took the case. It was thrown out by the judge after the prosecution gave its case. There's no defense was given at all, because they were permitted. It was a technicality, because they were permitted in the opening of the building, and anyhow, it was a technicality. We didn't get to do our whole civil rights trip out of it. There were 2 gay men that were arrested too, because once the cops got rid of the people at the door, then they got to go in the building, and they had to then arrest somebody to justify what they had done. And they arrested 2 gay men. The show was going on, and they happened to be standing on chairs, folding chairs, and one of them started to give, and the other one grabbed the other one by the butt. Lewd behavior. But anyhow, what happened then is the next day we had 7 angry ministers that held a press conference and were really outraged by what they had witnessed. And there's nothing like having them there firsthand to witness it. Before that, they just heard our stories. This time, they lived through it. And I remember Cecil Williams' wife, Eve, saying, "Del, this is just like living in the South." They began to see it in another light. And from then on, we really did have full support.
I'd like to say something. You see, the law reads, there was no reason for us to have a dress on New Year's. That was something that the community, up until this time, we did. The only time that you could wear a dress was Halloween, but the dress had to come off at midnight. That was the law, and the law reads, with the intent to deceive. We did not have the sophistication of drag as we have it today. We pinch our cheeks, bite our lips, and we thought we were gorgeous, you know. I circumvented this by having everybody put a sign on saying, I am a boy. So when the cops would arrest you, you were not deceiving. Of course, they came very angry at me. And they said, that little smart ass down there, we're going to get her too, you know. But that was the thing. But you must remember, as Del was saying, all this pandemonium at the door, I was on stage at that time. And as they were arresting them and hassling them, we were singing Onward Christian Soldiers, Glory, Glory, Hallelujah, Lord God Save the Nelly Queens. It was done with high fashion.
That was Jose Sarria, and before him, Del Martin. The next question that was asked of our panel was, what was San Francisco's first lesbian bar? Phyllis Lyon answered the question, but not without some kibitzing by Jose Sarria.
Where the first lesbian bar was must have been on the Isle of Lesbos. I have no idea. There were many, many, many. They were way back in the 40s. They were back before we were around. There were...
In the 40s, the war was on. There was no gay bars. There was no lesbian bars.
There certainly were, Jose. North Beach, there were a lot.
12 Adler Lane was one of the first.
Mona's, Chi-Chi, Ansport 40.
Mona's was the place for the lesbian girls, really. I would say, okay, Mona's would be fine. But 12 Adler Lane was a place where...
That was later. 12 Adler Place. Anyhow, I don't think there were bars in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right, and so on up. And they varied in quantity and quality, and they varied from place to place. And when I first came on the scene, and even before me, when Del first came on the scene, they were all up in North Beach. And they were, again, more tourist kinds of places. One of the first places she ever took me when I came to San Francisco was Mona's Candlelight on Broadway. But, there have been a lot of changes. And certainly they were not safe for the ones on Broadway were. But later, when they were just, kind of scattered around the city and so on, they weren't very safe at all.
That was Phyllis Lyon, concluding our panel on gay history of San Francisco from 1950 to 65. And now some music on the gay life from Waltz to Roses. When we were born, they tried to cover our eyes. Then they tried to tell us all what to see. We are discovering that did not work, for we were born to be free. It's a gay spirit singing in our hearts, leading us through these troubled times. It's a gay spirit moving round this land, calling us to a time of open love. When we were born, they tried to put us all in a cage, then tell our bodies what to feel. We have chosen to feel all the truth that our bodies do reveal. The gay spirit singing in our hearts, leading us through these troubled times. It's a gay spirit moving round this land, calling us to a time of open love. We are no strangers to all the pain that comes with fighting for our love. We are the outlaws in a love-sick land, whose crime has only been to care. There's a gay spirit singing in our hearts,
leading us through these troubled times. It's a gay spirit moving around this land, calling us to a time of open love. You run and tell that old patriarch we're no longer blind to his ways. You run and tell him that we've stolen all the keys to the prison he has made. Tell him there's a gay spirit moving around this land, leading us through these troubled times. A gay spirit singing in our hearts, calling us to a time of open love. Sometimes it gets too hard to feel all the joy in the face of all the pain we see. But there's a healing place within our hearts. It's coming alive in you and me. There's a gay spirit singing in our hearts, leading us through these troubled times. It's a gay spirit moving around this land, calling us to a time of open love. There's a gay spirit singing in our hearts, leading us through these troubled times. It's a gay spirit moving around this land, calling us to a time of open love. It's a gay spirit singing in our hearts, leading us through these troubled times. A gay spirit moving around this land, calling us to a time of open love.
That was Charlie Murphy and the Walls to Roses Music Collective singing Gay Spirit from the Folkways album Walls to Roses. Before we close this morning, I want to tell you about a handy little pocket pamphlet called the Gay and Sexual Minority Youth Resource Directory. It has phone listings for switchboards, housing, food, clothing, legal services, jobs, counseling, medical, dental, and alcohol and drug treatment help. If you're interested in obtaining a copy of this directory, call Sue Saperstein or Daniel Ostro at 558-4801. That's the Gay and Sexual Minority Youth Resource Directory. Fits right in your pocket. You can get it by calling Sue or Dan at 558-4801. That about wraps it up on the Gay Life this morning. We've presented a panel on the gay history of San Francisco from 1950 to 1965. And the speakers on the panel were Dor Jones, Jose Saria, Del Martin, and Phyllis Lyon. The Gay Life is engineered by Ern Morgan and produced by me, Randy Alfred. I also write 2 columns, Taking Sides and On Live, for The Sentinel, which is available in gay neighborhoods throughout San Francisco. If you're listening on Saturday morning, this show will be repeated late Sunday night at 1 a.m. So please tell a friend about The Gay Life on KSAN.